The end of the 2022 college football season is unfortunately in sight, but some big games on the docket for week 13 across the gridiron. We'll talk about the major matchups, including Iowa, Nebraska. I'll give you a score prediction for the game on Black Friday. But first, want to thank Ascent Nutrition, their organic, mold and mycotoxin-free coffee. It's pure, it's great tasting. It won't harm your body with the pesticides that most coffees are treated with. And of course, Under the Kitchen, check their stuff out as well. That's Randy Engel down at Mitchellville, taking care of your Hawkeye art needs. Under the Kitchen on Facebook for more details. All right, Iowa and Nebraska on Friday. We understand the matchup. We understand what's at stake. The Hawkeyes on the verge of heading to Indy if they win, but plenty of other games on the docket. So we'll get back to the Huskers and the Hawks towards the end of our picks. But we want to start out with Florida and Florida State. By the way, a number of really solid matchups on Black Friday, this being one of them. Big in-state rivalry. The Seminoles favored by 9.5. Florida coming off a loss to Vanderbilt. The Commodores coming on strong this late in the season. 2 straight wins against the SEC. Florida State, 9.5-point favorites. I like the Seminoles to cover that number. Would not have guessed that if you asked me that 7 weeks ago. I'd have probably taken the Gators straight up and against that number. But I will take Florida State in both categories. North Carolina State, North Carolina, another solid Black Friday showdown between in-state rivals. The Tar Heels favored by 6.5. I like UNC to win. I like them to cover. They take care of the Wolfpack, who has this team is unfortunately taken a step in the wrong direction. We thought maybe they were a top 10 team earlier this year, potential contender for the playoff. They're on the verge of winning just 7 games in the season if they lose on Friday. Baylor in Texas, the Longhorns 8.5-point favorites. Baylor, kind of their season has kind of gone off the deep end as well, although they can fight to a decent bowl game this winter. I'll take the Longhorns against the number. They'll win straight up and they'll cover. I think it's an easy win for Texas at home. We'll come back to Michigan. Ohio State was the next one on my list, but let's save that towards the end, given the implications for that one. South Carolina and Clemson. South Carolina has kind of had an interesting stretch, right, with their win against Tennessee. Certainly, Clemson's the trendy pick. South Carolina coming off the high. And, of course, Clemson's been terrific all season. They are 14.5-point favorites. They need to win this game. No question about it. They need to win this game. Playoff implications on the line here. I like Clemson to win. I think South Carolina will fight. I don't think it's going to be a letdown game like some people are guessing. This is a rivalry game. I like South Carolina to play it close. They'll cover the 14.5, but Clemson moves on and keeps their playoff hopes alive. Auburn and Alabama, the second biggest rivalry in college football, I guess you could say. Certainly, Bama, the heavy favorites in this one. Auburn's been a train wreck. Alabama, though, when's the last time this game's been played where Alabama's basically out of the college football playoff conversation? And they're basically out. 21.5-point favorites, the Tide over Auburn. I like Alabama to win. I don't think they'll cover that number. This game seems to typically be close, not always, but I think Auburn, if they're going to get up for any game, it'll be this one. Hard not to pick War Eagle here. I like Alabama to win, Auburn to cover the 21.5. Oregon and Oregon State, another in-state rivalry. This game being played in Corvallis. And this line is kind of stinky to me. Oregon, the 3.5-point favorites. I'm going to take Oregon. I'll take them against that number. But, this is a game where I could see Oregon State finding a way to win. Certainly, in-state rivalries, they're just hard to predict, right? And home game for the Beavers. We don't know what their future will entail, what the future of the Pac-12 will look like. They're one of those teams that could be on the outside looking in to some of the big conferences with realignment down the road. So this is one of those games, you treasure this if you're a Beaver fan, because you just don't know where you're going to end up in a few years or whether this rivalry will remain intact. Hopefully it does, regardless of conference realignment. Minnesota and Wisconsin, right? Another big rivalry in the Big Ten Conference. Wisconsin, 3.5-point favorites coming off that comeback victory against the Huskers. Minnesota losing despite beating Iowa in rushing totals by over 250 yards. I like Minnesota to go on the road and win. They're a better team, but the game is being played in Madison. I'll take Minnesota in both categories, straight up and against the 3.5. TCU, speaking of teams needing a win, Iowa State can play spoiler this weekend. Iowa State will not play in a bowl game this year. which is surprising to a lot of people. Their defense was terrific all year, but just couldn't find any semblance of offense, and we're not nearly as fortunate with special teams like Iowa was. And that really has been the difference between Iowa and Iowa State. Iowa's had a terrific special teams unit. Iowa State's been okay, but have not been able to create the big plays in big moments like Iowa has. I've got TCU winning this game, but TCU's been playing everybody close. They have not beaten a team by more than 10 points since October 1st, and yet they're on the verge of going to the college football playoff potentially. Iowa State covers the 10.5. This game is being played in Texas. I like TCU to win the game, though. LSU and Texas A&M. LSU 10.5-point favorites on the road at the Aggies. Texas A&M, talk about being a train wreck. Jimbo Fisher's future very much in question with the Aggies. I like LSU in both categories. I think they run away with this game and certainly heat upon a guy with a massive contract at Texas A&M, but I think LSU wins. And Brian Kelly and the Tigers are in contention for one of those final playoff spots as well, depending on what happens this weekend. And, of course, the Michigan-Ohio State game. For the loser of that game, that will be interesting to see what happens, because that team will not end up in the Big Ten championship game, so this will be their last game prior to the selection of the College Football 4. All right, Notre Dame and USC, another big rivalry game. This is my upset of the week, if you will. I've got Notre Dame going on the road and upsetting the Trojans, who are just 5.5-point favorites at home. I think Notre Dame wins, and they cover the number. All right, the game, Ohio State and Michigan. We know the storylines here. Both teams undefeated. Of course, both teams vying for playoff positioning, and some fans of each of these schools would argue that this game is bigger than any potential college football playoff appearance. I can't imagine being on the other end of that, but I've heard that from multiple fans. This game being played in Columbus, the Buckeyes losing last year to the Wolverines. Michigan struggled last week against Illinois. Ohio State's basically rolled their schedule. Struggled, in a couple of games. Northwestern, Notre Dame, they've had their moments, but for the most part, even Maryland, they had some moments in that game where they struggled. For the most part, they've been dominant. And Michigan has been dominant for the most part up until last week. And I give Brett Bielema and his guys tons of credit for pushing the Wolverines and falling just short. I've got OSU winning this game. I think Michigan covers. It will be close, but I think OSU, too much skill position talent, and we got to see J.J. McCarthy make more plays through the air. That's the one question I have. The quarterback battle, to me, at this point, based on what I've seen, unquestionably is in favor of Ohio State and C.J. Stroud. He's been terrific, and McCarthy's got a lot to prove. Certainly should be an entertaining game between the Buckeyes and the Wolverines on Saturday. I've got Michigan covering that 7.5, though. All right, which brings us to the big game for Iowa fans, the Hawkeyes and the Huskers. People saying, I released a preview yesterday for this game. If you missed that, I'll throw it up here in the corner for you to click on. But people saying that Nebraska, you're kind of making fun of me for saying that Nebraska is a dangerous offense. Go back and watch the Nebraska-Purdue game, and people were defending Purdue secondary. All right, I told you Purdue secondary ain't no good. Iowa proved that when they traveled to West Lafayette and took care of the Boilermakers. But that tandem, Casey Thompson and Trey Palmer, can be dynamic. And Casey Thompson has not been healthy. If he's healthy this week, and I get that's a big question mark, they will hit a big play or two. I would not be surprised. They're going to take shots. Nebraska will take shots at you. They're not afraid to make big plays. That's what their offense is based upon. And Iowa hasn't seen that in a while. Think about Iowa's most recent victories. Wisconsin, Minnesota, those teams predicated on running the football. Purdue would be the one team they've played since the bye week that takes shots, right? Or I guess I shouldn't say since the bye week, since the Ohio State game. That takes shots. They like to throw the ball around the yard. The problem is that game in West Lafayette was extremely windy, and Iowa played great defensively. Don't get me wrong, but you could not throw the ball effectively in that game, at least not down the field consistently. And Iowa played solid against Ohio State, stopped the run. C.J. Stroud made some excellent plays through the air, but Iowa was good. I'm just saying not a lot of teams have been able to take shots against Iowa State. Certainly Northwestern wasn't able to do that. And Iowa just didn't have a lot of teams on the schedule that were capable of doing that. Iowa State's another good example. Typically, they'd be a team that makes big plays at times. But boy, they, again, as I said earlier, they have struggled mightily on offense. So Nebraska's an exception to the rule there. They're going to take shots. They got nothing to lose. Mickey Joseph, I think his players love Mickey Joseph. He's not going to be the next head coach there. So play for your coach, perhaps play for his resume so he can get a solid job somewhere else. I don't know what his resume looks like as far as other potential jobs across the country. I think his players are tired of losing to Iowa, especially his older guys. And why would you ever expect Iowa's offense to blow anybody out? Now, could Nebraska come into Kinnick, make a ton of mistakes, turn the ball over, special teams gas, and Iowa run away with it that way? That's possible, but it's hard to predict, although Iowa does it consistently. I think this is a close game heading into the fourth quarter. Just perspective here, and I know someone else told me, well, who cares what recent results are, at least recent results in this series? Well, I think it's relevant. I mean, Iowa hasn't blown Nebraska out since 2017. That's 4 straight games in this rivalry in which Iowa has won by 1 possession. So do we have any reason to think with a historically bad offense in Iowa this year that it will be any different? I think this is a close game. I think Iowa wins this game something like 20-17. 20-17, the final score. The Hawkeyes and the Huskers this weekend on Friday. And of course, we will have post-game coverage not following the game immediately. We'll have post-game coverage at approximately 9:15 p.m. Central Time because we'll have post-game coverage for Iowa basketball at about 8 o'clock Central Time because Iowa Clemson play down at the Emerald Coast Classic immediately following Iowa football. So we'll have post-game coverage after basketball and then post-game coverage with Coach Don Patterson at approximately 9:15 p.m. Central Time. The game on Friday at 3 p.m. Central Time on BTN. And by the way, one other note about making big plays. This is the first game in a while in which the weather will be perfect for explosive plays. Not saying Nebraska will get them, but it's supposed to be around 50 degrees, sunny in the first half. Sun will set in the second half, but no wind. Looks like the rain will hold off until at least Saturday, folks. Great weather to be at this game, but it's also great weather for a team like Nebraska. Weather would be in favor of Nebraska for the game this Friday. So we'll see what happens. I've got Iowa 20-17, and we'll be with you for post-game coverage right here from the Hawkeye of the Storm.